Hello there, sword friends. Today I'm going to tell you about this sword right here. This is the Messer from DarkSword Armory. And before I get into the review, some disclaimers. One, this is a review sample. If you think that makes me biased, you know at the start. I didn't spend any money on it. It was sent to me from DarkSword Armory, you know, at the beginning. Two, I don't study any kind of historic system that involves a Messer, but I do understand pointy end goes in the other guy. I study swordsmanship of a different variety, and hopefully it makes me not completely incompetent while moving it around. But if I look that way, it might be because I am, so you should know that context. The other bit is, what is this video for? So the idea here is that I give you some close-ups, I give you some ideas on if it's worth your money or not, or at least hopefully you can mute the video, watch it without me babbling, and then get some idea of what to expect if you were to buy one from DarkSword Armory. At $510 to $655, there's a bit of a range. This one was the sharpened variety. You should also know I took a ceramic stone to it before sharpening it. Spent about a minute with it. I don't find that particularly consequential, but I find it helps just a little bit if I'm sharpening, get off any burrs or anything that might have happened during shipping, but I didn't resharpen it or anything like that. Anyway, the idea is you get to see close-ups of the sword, you get to see me cut with the sword, and then I give you my thoughts if they matter to you at the end. And that's the pace for this video. What I won't be doing is breaking it, and I've done that with other DarkSword Armory pieces. I feel like they've kind of proven their worth in terms of durability, and this is a big, thick piece of steel. I don't know if there's a whole lot of value in pushing it to failure, but if you think there is, let me know in the comments. I can revisit, reevaluate if you think there's some merit in pushing it to failure, though I'd imagine it's going to make me sweat if I do. It is a big lump of steel, and so it's probably going to take a licking and keep on ticking. Most of the heat treatments and stuff on other DarkSword Armory, the Alexandria and the Baron that I broke and pushed all the way to breaking, were rather loath to break and took a lot of abuse before they did. I expect this one will probably be the same. Anyway, that's what's in store for the video. If you think that's interesting, then stick around, and if you don't, then I can't blame you. Watch something else, I guess. Anyway, on with the reviewing. All right, so first I'm going to talk about the peen, the end cap, the pommel bit right here. And this, first off, in terms of construction, it looks like it's peened like any other pommel. Messers can have the tang of the blade running like into the pommel, into a slat or something like that. They can be scales, they can be all manner of different shapes. But this looks like a lump of steel that is put on the end and then peened on like any other sword that DarkSword Armory might sell. And the peen construction, honestly, is a little rough for me. Now, I don't see a whole lot of tool marks. They look like they've been filed and buffed down, but the kind of hammer marks, or rather the crudeness, the ledges that I see on here are a little bit rough for a sword in this range. I see crudeness like this in $200 swords. Maybe not as buffed and cleaned up as this, but still, it looks a little rougher than it needs to. That's the construction, though. It does appear to be on there relatively solid. On top of that, the ledge along the bottom is a little rough. So if I grab the pommel and move it in my hand, it doesn't exactly cut into me, but certainly it can. It has a little bit more crisp a ledge on it than I would like, and I tend to grab the pommel, so that's unfortunate. But if I don't do that, then the rest of it is actually reasonably chamfered, or rather ergonomic enough that it doesn't bite into my flesh. And I like some of the extra detailing around here. There's a cross pattern that goes in. There's some different stepping and facets that happen. And overall, I happen to like the design of the pommel itself. But it's left a little sharp and a little crude on the peen. I like that it not only has some decoration, but it's different in dimension. It's not just round, and it lines up into the scales on the grip reasonably well. So there's some filler that's used here, but honestly, there's no giant gaps or anything like that. And the filler, I would say, is present. If I look at it really close, I can also make out what looks like buffing compound that's been stuck in some of the crosses, or detailing. Now, if I'm really picky about it, I could pick it out, but I do see some of that residual left over. Given that this is one that didn't make it to sale, I don't know if it would be cleaned up if you bought one new. It wouldn't be hard to clean, but frankly, it's just not something you should have to do on a new sword. But the use of gap filler, I guess, is excusable in a sword in this price point. And honestly, I've seen swords that have, particularly wooden scales are involved. Warping, gaps, holes, you know, all manner of things. This overall is relatively clean and free of any spaces. Now, it's not as refined as you might see on a $500 knife, but it's not bad in the sword world. Now, moving up to the grip itself, I'll start with these scales. As I noted, not a whole lot of gapping. There are 3 pins that run up. There's not any holes. Sometimes there's pins that are hollow so that you could attach a lanyard, or I don't know, it's commonly used in messers. That's not the case here. It looks a bit like a knife handle. It's octagonal, I believe, in overall dimension, and it's still somewhat round, so I can index it. I feel where the edge is right away, but despite its kind of quasi-elliptical octagonal shape, I can still, you know, poke one of the quillins and turn it without a whole lot of force. So one thing I do with a grip to see if it's going to stay stable in my hand is I hold it, white knuckle it, and then I grab one of the quillins and try and twist it. And if I can, what that means is if I impact hard things, if I strike really hard with the piece, it's probably going to turn in my hand. And that is something that I found to be the case when I was out there actually moving things around and trying to cut with it. I'd have to impact it. Now, off camera, what you didn't get to see is that I went and cleared some brush and chopped into old dead wood. And I did find it turn in my hand when I did that, but any light cutting I didn't find to actually be too problematic. Like I said, it indexes well, but on a hard cut, it can turn a bit in your hand. Now, apart from that, where it lines up the transitions and how it butts into the rest of the fittings are actually overall reasonably well done. There are some, well, more or less you can see whoever was grinding on it, the wood moved faster than the steel, so there are some spots that are imperfect or left some sort of compound, but no gaps, no giant lumps, nothing that really is too bad. And that's kind of what I'm expecting in the $500 to $600 range. You might expect perfection. I don't know that you're gonna get that anywhere near that price, but for this it looks overall clean compared to what I've seen on the market from other scaled handles. The other bit is this particular handle you can fit 2 hands on, should you so choose. And I did not generally choose to do it. It's not a particularly large messer, so I held it in one hand. But what I did find as well is that I could hold it down near the end, and it changed the overall positioning. It made it a little bit easier to thrust with, to get a little bit more length, and it put it in line with the tip became in line with my wrist. So the handle has some element of function, though I generally choked up near the crossguard, and that's where I would generally swing the sword and where I found it to be the most comfortable. But the handle does offer some level of versatility, which is appreciated and something that I don't see in a lot of messers on the market. This one is a little different in that way. Now, apart from that, you can see the tang running through, so you know that it's there. And I know DarkSword Armory has gotten some criticism for the size of its tangs in the past, but this one you can see is quite thick, robust, and present and clearly visible throughout. Which brings us up to the crossguard area here. Now, this crossguard is manufactured in a way that I don't typically see messers done. So a lot of time the crossguard is, I don't know if it slides down the blade or slides up, but this one clearly slid up. The blade is resting in like a little shoulder inside the crossguard, which is what I commonly see on a lot of European swords. But in messers cases, the crossguards are usually almost open at the bottom, and I don't know if they're extra peened or something, and the naggle is usually run through and has another peen, as where this one looks like it's welded on and then cleaned up. I don't know if this naggle is made in such a way where it's peened in and welded around, but it looks like it's more or less just welded on and then cleaned up and buffed out. So the construction is a little bit more along the lines of a European style handle, at least the ways that DarkSword Armory does it, and not the ways that I've seen other messers have a naggle attached, which usually involves another peen that runs through this crossguard section. What that means is I'm not entirely confident that this naggle will do things the way I think of a naggle, which is as an extension of the crossguard that I can move things around and that will take a hit. But I've been recently educated that the naggle may not be for that, and that it offers maybe some parrying protection, but I don't know, it allows you some sort of difference in the bind. I don't fence with a messer, so I don't know, and I don't honestly know how much beating it's expected to take. But I wouldn't have a lot of confidence in this one taking like a full-on strike from another sword. But if it was to protect your hand in a bind or push, I think it would offer support in that regard. But it doesn't feel like it's going to have the same amount of durability that you would if it were peened all the way through the blade, and it may well crack off if you if you hit it really hard. So I see that as a potential point of weakness, but not one that really presented itself as a problem, though I didn't have anyone try to hit me in the face with a sword. The rest of the handle is a bit blocky for me, so I appreciate the faceted design, the little kind of groove that's laid in here, the fact that the handle is buffed, but this big chunky section here is not really aesthetically pleasing to me. As I understand it, this sword was part of a design contest or something like that. So maybe this is the way the original was designed, but to me it looks a little bit chunky. And further, if I choke up on the guard, this ledge right here, if I grab it, can kind of peel away at my finger, and some of these ledges are also uncomfortable. So if it were more rounded, I would personally like that. And then also this naggle just sticks out more than I'm used to seeing. It looks more saber, kind of rapier protection-y. Usually the naggle doesn't stick out as far. It doesn't completely cover my knuckles due to my sausage hands. So this one is just shaped a little differently. It looks like a naggle made by somebody who doesn't typically well, I don't know how. I'm not familiar with the historical details of Messers, but it's different and very unique to DarkSword Armory in the way that this is presented. It's a little bit more of a hand guard than a naggle is typically. Now, where the blade meets the crossguard, there is a visible gap that goes around it, but in comparison to some of the other DarkSword Armory blades that I've seen, it's a little bit smaller. There's maybe 1 millimeter or 0.5 millimeter that goes around. It's not grotesque, it's reasonably even. I'd love to see it really trimmed up and kind of perfectly set in. It's a point that I harp on all the time. It doesn't have any functional difference. It's not really ahistoric, but it is something hard to do and something that shows quality machining in terms of tightness of tolerances and stuff, but just a point that I harp on a lot when I talk about swords, but it doesn't, for fairness, make really much of a meaningful difference in the use of the sword. Anyway, that brings us up to the blade, the pointy stabby part. So the base of the blade didn't really get much attention from me, but I would say this one came reasonably sharp. As I noted, I took a ceramic stone for about a minute and just tried to knock off any burrs or anything like that before I cut, but I didn't sharpen it. I would say that it actually came reasonably sharp though, which you'll see a little bit later. Apart from that though, it's basically one wide blade that has very minimal tapering. In any direction you look at it, it's pretty thick all the way up. It widens just a little bit before this clip point area. This is a false edge. It would take a little bit of work to get an edge on this false edge. I did not put one on, but it has the profile where theoretically you could do it, but it's blunt enough where it would take a little bit of work to get it on there. There's no distal taper. It stays pretty much a uniform thickness. And there's a fuller that is here, I would guess more or less for decoration than anything else, because it's not particularly deep and it's not particularly wide, so I don't imagine it's offering much in the way of weight savings. I don't know if it stiffens the blade or anything like that, but in terms of stiffness, it is relatively stiff. If I try to bend it, it doesn't really move around very much, so it has a pretty stiff construction if you want to thrust, and that also means that it kind of aids you a little bit in the cut. Other than that, it's just buffed, so it's a little bit shinier than usual. It's not quite a mirror polish, but pretty close, and those are the general features of the blade. Now, I'll talk briefly about cutting. I didn't do a huge amount of cutting on camera. I cut some water bottles and stuff, and what I can tell you is it actually cut better than I would expect it to. The sharpness, when I initially saw it, looked like a big old secondary bevel, and while I could feel a reasonably keen edge, I didn't expect it to actually chop through stuff as well as it did. So it actually cut reasonably well, but the weight was really quite an impact. This is a little over 3 pounds, which is not abnormal for a sword. It's in the range of most long swords, or swords that probably have 10-15 inches in length on it. But for some reason, the way this one moves was taxing on my elbow. It's not easy to start getting in motion. It's not particularly easy to stop. The grip offers some versatility. Obviously, you can handle it better in 2 hands, but I didn't find it particularly comfortable to be chopping and cutting with. I think a sword like this should probably be a little bit, well, it doesn't necessarily have to be lighter. I would just imagine that if the profile up here near the top third of the blade were thinner and the bottom of the blade took whatever thickness it had and moved it down, it would change the balance a little bit and make it a little bit more nimble in my hand. Those would be the main critique that I'd have that would enhance this blade significantly. But I digress. It wasn't particularly fun to move, but it actually cut surprisingly well with the edge. As I said, I honed it up with a ceramic stone. That was about all I did to it. And then from there, it was fun to chop brush and all that kind of stuff in the backyard and water bottles and whatnot. Now, off camera, I was going in my backyard and clearing up some brush. I happened to have this in my hand at the same time because I had just finished filming, and I cut a lot of dead branches with this sword, more than I expected to because my son was back there. We were having fun. I whacked this into a number of dead trees. I thrust in with the tip, and it held up, and it's still rock solid. Nothing is rattling. Nothing is doing anything. It's and it's reasonably, well, it's just as sharp as it was when I took the ceramic stone. If I went to a water bottle, it, it still has the edge that I wouldn't want to run my finger across, and that's better than I expected given what I was cutting. I wasn't expecting it to hold the edge as well as it did, since it has a robust edge, but it had a good water bottle cutting edge, so I would guess there's something there that could be dinged or diminished more significantly cutting into old, hard, dead wood, and it didn't seem to. So heat treatment and all that kind of stuff doesn't seem suspect, and DarkSword Armory, in fairness, it seems to do that reasonably well. Anyway, that's the cutting. I would say it did better than I expected, but was harder to move, honestly, than I expected. And that's about really all I can say. I don't know any forms or kata or have much else to talk about in terms of moving it around, other than I can say it's not particularly fun. So that brings me to maybe a little bit of a comparison. Now, I've been fortunate enough to handle a number of messers from other companies. Messers were not my bag of tricks and then kind of became my bag of tricks. I've handled more than a few of them now. And this one is just not as lively as it could be. I think if the grip were extended and made just a little bit wider, not a lot, maybe 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, it would lock it into my hand a little bit better. If this were made a little bit more rounded, which I think I could certainly accommodate, the grip would lock in my hand a little better, feel a little better. I like the crossguard to change these edges to be rounded out and for a naggle to be peened in. That seems a little bit more secure to me in terms of construction, and I'd like it to be made at least a little thicker where the fingers are. The first inch out, it should be, maybe in my mind, able to take something of a sword strike. The rest of it can be kind of thin, and then the blade to have some distal taper. I'd like it thicker at the base and to be about half as thick out at the end, and I think that would make this sword sing. It's really just some tweaking in terms of grinding. I don't think this is unapproachable. I think the design of the sword really just needs a little bit more work before it would sing, and I'm basing that on some of the experiences I've had with Lands Connect Emporium. Those guys seem to have a pretty good command of distal taper and making the sword feel lively. Messers, despite the fact they can look like big chunky things, can really be nimble, lively, fun things to move around. They can feel quite robust in the hand while simultaneously being agile and like you have a lot of point control. This just lacks the dynamics for me. I think from a design perspective, I like the overall look and silhouette. It has a look that other people don't have, but it just needs a little bit of tweaking and where some of the weight is, and it would change it, I think, pretty dramatically for the better, at least in my eyes. Anyway, that brings me to the point, do I personally think it's worth it or not? And in short, for $500, unfortunately, no, I don't. If they made those changes, I would say it would certainly be a contender. This has, like I said, a good look, and it has some ornate detailing on it, which I certainly appreciate. But right now for $500, I can look at something from Lands Connect Emporium, which also has kind of a unique look, and they have a bunch of different blade shapes, and they feel really lively and good in the hand. All the critiques that I have about this one are addressed in those, and they're at a similar price point. So I would lean that direction if I were spending $500 on a messer. But if this had those facets addressed, then I think it would be kind of a cool, compelling option. It's not that it's too heavy, it's just that weight seems to be in the wrong place for me. Or, I guess it could be thinned out a little bit too. Anyway, no is the answer, but I think it's nearly there. It needs a little bit of tweaking, but otherwise, if it had those things, then I would like it. If it were a little bit lighter, if it moved around, or rather just moved in my hand a little better, had that addressed, I would be happy. But otherwise, I'm happy with the durability. I'm happy with how the scales are attached. I like the overall design. I like the sharpness. A lot of things were done right here, but it still feels just not as fun in the hand as some of the competition at a similar price. Anyway, those are my thoughts. I do want to offer a thanks to DarkSword Armory, and I'd certainly be eager to see any kind of redesigns that they make on this sword. I think they're planning at least on changing some things up around their messer line. I'm kind of eager to see what they do, because their swords are a little beefy, and I think they're capable of making something a little bit more dynamically superior than this one here. And so if that happens, I'd certainly love to revisit it. But that's all I've got. Again, thanks to DarkSword Armory. Hopefully the video is interesting. Cheers, and thanks for watching.